Hospitals are meant to heal, but some rooms hold more than just patients. From dark hallways to things that can't be explained, these creepy true stories will stay with you long after the lights go out. If you enjoy spooky stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more chillin' tales every day. I have been a nurse for 22 years, and I have worked in several facilities now, especially because I was a travel nurse during the pandemic. As you may imagine, hospitals are the setting for the extremes of life and death, the extremes of human emotion. There are moments of intense joy and moments of intense pain. There is suffering and there is healing. I have witnessed all of this in my career. If you have any inclination to believe in the paranormal, then you understand that a hospital is the ideal setting for unexplained events. Most hospitals I have worked in harbor rumors of paranormal events or weird things on security cameras. It's pretty commonplace stuff, so generally we only discuss it if something particularly creepy happens. One hospital that I worked in for the first 10 years of my career was remarkably active in this regard. In the span of my 10-year career there, I witnessed way more stuff than I cared to, way more stuff than I have ever seen anywhere else. During my tenure at this facility, cardiac monitors would suddenly turn on by themselves when rooms were unoccupied. Patients would report seeing angels, demons, and children, mostly children though. A cross shot off a wall in my patient's room. A colleague and I witnessed a crash cart moving all by itself. A vacant floor was rumored to be haunted, and after sleeping there one night of a snowstorm, I understood why, as well as several other bizarre events. It was an old, large hospital in a medium-sized Midwestern city. Nothing terribly remarkable about it, the hospital or the city. After moving on to other places of employment, I realize now that this hospital had a particularly dark atmosphere, one that was almost oppressive. There I witnessed some of the worst crimes against humanity I have ever seen or heard of, and it was a generally sad and scary place to work. Two of my colleagues were stabbed while we were working. I unfortunately witnessed both. Patients were particularly violent here, and I was attacked more times than I can count. An employee committed suicide by jumping off the 12-story main tower. Now that I work and live 2,000 miles from there, I realize how dark this place really was. It's nice to have moved on to greener pastures. I'm a psychiatric nurse. Early in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. There was a resident I'll call Marion Duchesne. He was an elective mute, which simply means that he couldn't talk, but there were no pathological findings as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the notable exception of being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the Deep South and joined the military when he was 19. After boot camp, he was stationed somewhere in the South. One night, he just vanished. It was declared an AWOL for years. Finally, he was declared missing and dead. 10 years later, a 7-foot-tall man walked into a VA hospital emergency room in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Duchesne, and I've been dead for 10 years. Those were the last words he ever spoke. He was covered with dust, and he was wearing the same clothes he'd been reported to be wearing the night he vanished. His social security number had not been used, and he had no identification on his person. However, they were able to identify him, I guess, via fingerprints. He was well fed and in good health, except for his refusal to speak. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man, and that whomever was claiming to be him simply could not be. They said he was a haint and a stand-in for their dead relative, and demanded not to be contacted again." Marion paced all day, every day. Not in a frantic way, but just lumbering up and down the halls and outside. He smiled all the time and would be moving his mouth in a way that indicated talking or muttering, but he was dead silent. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open as if he were laughing heartily, but not even a breath could be heard. If told to go to the dining room for a meal, he'd go and eat, but if nobody told him, he just kept pacing, never indicating hunger. If offered a cigarette, he'd smoke it in an oddly formal way, almost delicately, if that makes sense. But he never seemed to crave smoking. The man wanted nothing. If I talked to him, he appeared to listen, periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. There was nothing to do for this man. Various medications were tried, but they did not affect him either positively or negatively. Occupational therapy did nothing because Marion would just grin, and unless told to stay put, he'd get up and start pacing again. On my last day at that job, on my way to something better, the last thing I saw was Marion, pacing in the parking lot, throwing his head back to laugh. Later, I wondered if all along I've been dealing with a ghost. All these years later, I still don't know. This is a story that was told to me by a nurse who worked in a nursing home in a small Texas town. Now, in this nursing home, there were two wings which were connected by a hallway. Compared to the front wing, the back was always a bit heavy with gloom, maybe even spooky at times. Not sure how to explain it, but there was certainly a darker atmosphere. For this reason, the nurses disliked staying in the back, so after the residents were in bed and the night's last rounds were completed, they would migrate to the front nurses' station. This nightly trek went on for a while until the administration learned of it and, for liability reasons, instructed the back wing nurses to stay in their assigned place of duty. There were always ghostly happenings. Nonetheless, these incidents were mostly shrugged off as the imagination of tired and overworked employees. But there was one incident in particular that was quite terrifying and witnessed by several people. One resident, Mr. Gomez, was rumored to have been into witchcraft throughout his life. Late at night, Mr. Gomez, according to reports from other residents, would creep into their rooms. Like a serpent born of hell, he would slither on his stomach, his arms at his sides. His eyes would be rolled back in his head, his tongue darting in and out of his mouth, flicking the air like a human snake. He would crawl under their beds and try to push them off. He's the devil, the other residents would claim. Well, the reports weren't taken very seriously. After all, these old folks were half out of their minds. And realistically, how could feeble old Mr. Gomez, who needed the assistance of nurses just to get out of bed, be physically able of such actions? The nurses all agreed that the reports were just imagined stories of old confused people. That is, until the terrifying night that the nurses all became believers of the evil that lived within Mr. Gomez. It was well past midnight, the residents were sleeping, and the halls were quiet. The nurses had gathered in the back lobby to sit and wait for morning. Most of them were at the point of dozing off when a loud gasp broke the silence. One of the nurses stood up, a frightful expression upon her face. She pointed down the hall towards the residents' rooms. As the others turned to look, a horrifying scene unfolded. It was Mr. Gomez, slithering on his stomach, making his way down the hall and into the room of a slumbering woman. They just stood there, petrified, unsure of what to do. Mr. Gomez was now crawling through the hallway, heading right towards the lobby, and the fear struck nurses. The stories were true. Mr. Gomez was slithering like a snake, his eyes rolled back, and his tongue flicking in and out like a cursed beast. They watched as he snaked through the lobby furniture, crawling between chair legs and hissing at the shocked women. The nurses all ran up the hallway to the front desk. The doors to the back wing slammed shut as the last one passed through. They stayed up front for the next few hours, and as the sun began to peek over the horizon, they gathered enough courage to go check on the back wing. Everything was quiet, and Mr. Gomez was once again sleeping in his bed. A few nights later, Mr. Gomez passed away. As the nurses were attending to his body, several loud thumps were heard against the window. They pulled open the drapes to see what could have made the noise. And just as they did, an owl flew at the window, clawing at the pane as if trying to get in. The bird then flew into a nearby tree and landed among several other owls perched high in the branches. The birds just stared down at the room where Mr. Gomez lay dead, waiting to claim his soul. My auntie used to work as a nurse on a palliative care ward in a hospital. She always used to tell us a story about several strange things that used to happen when she worked night shifts. She worked the night shift with two other nurses on the left wing of the ward. The wing was made up of two sections with 8 beds in each. They had 8 patients in room 1 that evening. The nurses had looked after one particular gentleman for a while. He didn't often get many visitors as his wife had died years earlier, and he lost touch with his daughter, so they quite often kept him company. He always used to ask the nurse to leave a light on by his bed so he could read if he couldn't get to sleep, or for the television to be left on low. Apparently, he liked the voices in the background and it comforted him knowing someone was there. For these reasons, they moved him into the empty room 2 when they came into work around 9 p.m., so the noise light wouldn't bother the other patients. This became a little routine when second room was empty. My auntie and the 2 nurses started their shift as usual one evening and sadly discovered that the gentleman had passed away earlier that afternoon. Room 2 was now empty again, with the 7 other patients in room 1. It was 11 p.m., all the patients were asleep, and the only lights on were those illuminating the office section where the nurses were sat, along with computer monitors, and the ceiling lights at the end of the hallway leading to the next wing. They were taking their break, having a coffee, and chatting when one of them suddenly stopped talking and held her hand up. They listened and could hear someone talking nearby. At first, they assumed it was someone from the next wing walking past, but the talking remained a few minutes later. My auntie looked round the corner to see if there was anyone there. No one. She turned back around to go towards the desk and saw a light shimmering in room 2. She called the other nurses and they went into the room. The bedside light was on and the television was on in the bay where the gentleman used to sleep. Auntie said they got the shivers, but it made them feel slightly emotional. They switched off the light and television and went back to the desk. This apparently happened on 7 other occasions over the following weeks, even when other nurses were working. Same light, same television, always around 11 p.m. What my auntie said was so comforting, as she believed he enjoyed chatting with them and appreciated the extra effort they did to move him so he could watch the television after hours, so he came back to see them again for their little ritual. The wards later filled up and room 2 was being used more and more, so was rarely left unoccupied. One patient mentioned a light turning on and waking him up around midnight once, but he couldn't recall which one as he went back to sleep. The legend lives on and is explained to new staff who work there. Everyone on the ward to this day knows of the gentleman who likes to watch television late at night. I'm a chaplain who has worked on hospice. Near-death awareness is a known and accepted phenomena in the hospice community. The dying will begin talking to loved ones who have died, talking about seeing different animals, sometimes old pets, and some even talk about seeing death or an angel of death. The one most interesting to me was a patient I worked with a few months from the time he was in oncology to his decline to death. He was open spiritually, but had no religion. We held conversations about many spiritual things, so he was comfortable talking to me as he neared the end. One day he waited for his family and the nurse to leave and then called me back into his room. He said to me, "I don't want to scare anyone else, and I don't want them to think I'm crazy. I can see death. I can see her out in the parking lot. She isn't ugly. My brother is with her. It should be noted that he had bone cancer located to his pelvis, which eroded it so badly that eventually an artery would burst and they wouldn't be able to stop bleeding. He was on strong pain medications, but had nothing wrong with his brain and was entirely lucid. He talked about his family and his concerns for them and what he was leaving behind. A few days later, he called me into the room. He told me that death was now in the corner and she was calling him. He confessed he hadn't talked to his brother for years before he died, but he was so happy to see his brother with death calling to him. He asked me to pray for him in my own religion, Christianity, because he did not know how to pray before he died. He died that night. I have had numerous other experiences with death awareness, but this one has always stuck out to me. I'm open to interpreting it as the dying psychologically preparing for death. My job is to help them reach the most peace as possible before death, and if this is just psychological, so be it. I know he and others have died well. Let's start with some background. I have worked for a year and a half at the hospital as a service assistant. I've worked DS, day shift, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., ES, evening shift, 2 p.m. to 9 p.m., and NS, night shift, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. During the DS, we are around 50 to 90 in the service department. During ES, there are about 15 people, of which 10 are responsible for cooking from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., and during NS, there are only two of us. It's no secret that you experience the most during the late evening and early morning hours, and oh my, I've seen a lot during the time I've worked there. There are particularly two departments known to be haunted, Department 12 to 3 and Department 28 to 1. Both are outpatient departments, which means they are cleaned either in the evening or at night, and that's also where the most happens, Department 12 to 3. When I had just started, I had an evening shift, training shift with Morton. It was my third shift, so we decided to split up. Morton took the active 24-hour departments, as those are the busiest, and I was assigned 3 sleeping outpatient departments, as well as 1 closed department, which had been shut down because many patients became drastically and quickly more seriously ill. We call it Department 12 to 3. Morton told me to remember that, no matter what, here's a quote from him. If you hear something on 12 to 3, no you didn't. If you smell something on 12 to 3, no you didn't. If you see something on 12 to 3, no you didn't. If you hear someone, whether you know the voice or not, calling you, no you didn't. Leave the department immediately. Don't look back and stay calm. Go in the opposite direction of the voice. Of course, this was very unsettling to hear when I had to go up to that very department alone. After cleaning half of the department, I suddenly heard a knocking sound from one of the rooms, but kept working without reacting because if you hear something, no you didn't. As I was finishing 4 rooms, I suddenly heard Morton calling me and saying he needed my help in Department 14 to 2. I remember what he had said, stayed calm, and left the department quietly, taking the elevator down to the 2nd floor. I paged Morton, which we always used to contact each other during a shift, and asked if he had been to 12 to 3 and called me, and also asked if he needed help in 14 to 2. Morton was silent for a while and then said, "If I needed help, I would have paged you. You didn't respond, right?" Morton sounded really concerned, but I reassured him that I hadn't answered and had just left the department quietly, putting my cleaning card in place so everything seemed normal. Morton replied that he was glad to hear that and said we were done with 12 to 3F or the night. We'll report to DV that we missed 4 rooms to this day. I still don't know what's up with 12 to 3. I just know I've experienced it many times since during evening and night shifts, and I will never go back there, either as staff or a patient. On the same evening as the previous story, I had to clean in Department 12 to 4, which is the department just across from 12 to 3. This department is special. Here, the service staff must also check the surveillance footage during the afternoon and evening hours. While I was sitting and checking the surveillance, I got chills running down my spine. I jokingly filmed the screen of the surveillance system, as it's quite unnerving to sit alone in a closed apartment and watch the footage. To my great shock, I saw someone walking around in the waiting room on the footage. I even caught it on video, but the quality of my video was blurry in the seconds leading up to and during the moment the person was walking around. Department 28 to 1. Another evening, when I was on the evening shift, I had to clean in 28 to 1, which is another department known for being extremely haunted. It's a department where even during the day, staff feel uneasy being there. It's a locked department after 3 p.m., and unlike other outpatient departments, you need both a key card and a code to get in. There's no medicine or anything valuable there, but it's a department that no one wants to be in. Extra security has been added because the door has often opened by itself when patients or staff have walked past, even though the door was locked. I had to go in and clean, unlocking the door with both the key card and code. What's special about outpatient departments is that you don't turn on the lights when you clean in the evening to avoid patients thinking the department is open and wandering in. Anyway, I was in my own world cleaning when, during our evening shifts, we are allowed to listen to music through headphones, which I was doing this evening. There's a room 11 that never gets cleaned. No matter how many times you go in to clean, the door always gets locked again. It sounds like things are being knocked over and thrown around inside. When you open the door again, there's paper, trash, and all sorts of other things scattered all over the room. It's just a room you don't want to be in because there's an incredibly uncomfortable feeling and you feel like you're being watched. Additionally, you hear strange sounds throughout the department, like footsteps running down the hallway, things being thrown, knocking on doors and windows. and generally feeling watched throughout the department. I can't fully explain what's going on in the department, but it's not a nice place to be, and we all agree on that. Also, there's an elevator door leading into it, which can only be opened after 3 p.m. with both a code and key card. The service department's office is 2 floors above 28 to 1, so you often take the elevator down from the office and up to the office. One night when I was about to start my night shift, I went up to clock in on the schedule, then took the elevator down to the ground floor. The door normally opens outward to the main hallway, but this night, it also opened inward to 28 to 1, and I heard a voice saying, "Come right in." The door to the hallway wouldn't open, and I kept pressing to open it until the door to 28 to 1 closed and the door to the hallway opened. I work in a busy perioperative department. There is a charge nurse that I work with who has been a nurse for over 50 years. We will call her Gail. Gail is incredible, the mama of the unit. Everyone at this hospital knows her and loves her. She doesn't take shit from anyone, but also has this kind and approachable demeanor. She is an amazing resource if you want to know anything about anything. Anyway, I respect her immensely. Gail always opens the unit early in the morning. She has a very set routine and arrives about 30 minutes before the first shift even starts so that she can take her time writing out the schedule and tidying up the unit. So Gail arrived at the hospital early one morning a few years ago and parked in the large parking garage across the street. The employee garage is on the back side of the hospital, so it's easiest to enter through the supply loading entrance. This leads right into the basement of the hospital, and you can choose multiple routes to make your way to various elevators or staircases. The most direct route to the surgical area is to follow a very long hallway in the basement to the furthest elevator and then head up the stairs 2 floors, which will lead you directly to the unit. Not many employees go that route because the majority of staff work on inpatient units that are more centralized and not at the far end like surgery is. Gail is making her way down the long hallway and it's pretty quiet, especially at 5:30 a.m. But on this morning, she sees a doctor that she has known for years, a well-respected cardiologist, Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith had been diagnosed with cancer a few years prior and had been in and out of the hospital for treatment and admissions during times of illness. Gail was so happy to see him because it had been a few months, and he looked incredible. His treatments must have been working. As they passed each other, she said, "Dr. Smith, it's so good to see you. You look fantastic." "Doctor." Smith gave Gail a huge smile and said, "Gail, I feel better than I have in years. So nice to see you." Gail continued down the hall and up the stairs to the unit. She started preparing the schedule for the day, and surgeons started trickling in to input orders and review patient charts. Gail noticed another cardiologist who had also worked there for a very long time. She exclaimed, "Dr. Allen, I just saw Dr. Smith as I came in this morning. He looks amazing. I am so glad that he's responding to treatment." Dr. Allen was silent and had a strange look on his face. He walked over to Gail and put his hand on her shoulder. He said, "Gail, Dr. Smith passed away last night on 6 South, the cancer unit." Gail thought he was kidding. She insisted that she had just seen him. But Dr. Allen assured her that Dr. Smith had passed and was currently down in the morgue, in the basement. The entrance to the morgue is the only door in the middle of that long hallway that leads to the stairs. Gail fell silent as she realized she had seen him, walking past her as she approached the morgue entrance. He was headed toward the exit. She told Dr. Allen that she must have been mistaken as not to appear crazy, but she knew what she saw. She was pretty shaken up when we arrived for our shifts, and after a few hours she quietly told some of us what had happened. She stopped walking that direction and took the long route away from the morgue from then on. She retired last year and we all miss her dearly. Every time I walk down that hallway, I get shivers as I pass the morgue. Hospitals have a way of playing tricks on your mind at night. The sterile, buzzing environment is disconcerting in itself, but when darkness falls, it morphs into something entirely different, a quiet, echoing expanse that feels far too empty and unsettling. I'd been admitted for a minor surgery, nothing life-threatening, but they wanted me under observation for a few days, which was supposed to be routine. My room was tucked away at the end of a long hallway, isolated from the busier areas and far from the nurses' station. It felt peaceful at first, but as the hours stretched on, that solitude started feeling more like abandonment. It was on my second night that the uneasiness really started to creep in. I'd been drifting in and out of sleep, that hazy, half-awake state where sounds seemed louder than they should and shadows seemed darker. I heard footsteps in the hallway, which wasn't unusual for a hospital at night, but there was something off about them. They were slow, dragging, with long pauses between each step. I thought it was a nurse, maybe checking on patients with the quiet kind of diligence they use during night rounds, not wanting to disturb anyone. I turned over in bed, trying to ignore the sounds and get back to sleep, but I couldn't. The footsteps stopped right outside my door, lingering for a moment. I expected to hear the gentle knock or the soft creak of the door opening, but there was nothing, just silence. The longer I listened, the more unsettling it became. The presence outside my door didn't move, didn't make a sound. I looked at the clock, 3:07 a.m. I was just beginning to convince myself that I was overthinking things, maybe imagining it all, but then I saw it. A shadow stretched across the small sliver of light that seeped in from under the door. It wasn't a trick of the light. This shadow was clear, distinct, with a shape that looked human. But it didn't move like a person's shadow should. It just stayed there, motionless, as though someone was standing perfectly still right outside my door, watching. I sat up in bed, my pulse quickening but still clinging to rational explanations. Maybe it was a nurse on a call. Maybe they'd stepped away from my door for a moment. But as I stared, the shadow didn't budge. I strained to listen, trying to catch even the slightest noise, but there was nothing. After a few moments, the shadow receded, as if it was melting back into the darkness. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been a figment of my imagination. Hospitals and medication can play tricks on you, I reasoned. When the nurse came in to check my vitals, I casually mentioned it, almost laughing it off, but the nurse didn't seem amused. "Oh, you saw a shadow in the hallway?" she asked, her voice tight. Maybe just one of the night staff on rounds. Her response seemed rehearsed, forced, and it left a strange feeling in my gut. I tried to shake it off and spent the rest of the day in a distracted haze, unable to fully relax. Read it. That night, when the lights dimmed, the tension returned. I watched the hallway with weary eyes, dreading the thought of seeing that shadow again. Midnight came and went, and for a while everything was quiet. But at 3:02 a.m., I was woken up by the same slow, dragging footsteps. I lay still, my entire body tensing as I listened. The footsteps stopped outside my door again, and I braced myself, knowing what I would see. Sure enough, the shadow reappeared. But this time, it was like it was pressing itself against the crack beneath the door. The air felt thick. I stared at the shadow, unable to look away, wondering who or what was standing there and why they weren't coming in or moving away. Suddenly, the shadow shifted, as though whoever or whatever it was had changed its stance. Then, just as quickly, it melted into the darkness again, leaving the hallway silent. The next morning, I noticed a patient across the hall, an older man named Mr. Wills, talking to a nurse. I couldn't hear most of their conversation, but one phrase caught my attention, making my heart skip a beat: the shadow in the hallway. He'd seen it too. I knew it wasn't my imagination. There was something real lurking in the hallway at night, something that only showed itself in the dead hours when everyone else was asleep. I felt a chill settle over me as I looked back at my door, dreading the thought of another night in that room. When the nurse came in to check on me, I mentioned what Mr. Wills had said, hoping she might give me some kind of rational explanation. But her expression shifted, and she quickly dismissed it, saying Mr. Wills was on heavy medication and often hallucinated. But the way she avoided my eyes made me think there was more to it, something she didn't want to discuss. That night, I tried to keep myself awake, determined to catch the shadow if it came back. I kept my bedside light on, hoping it would be enough to keep whatever it was at bay. Hours passed, and I eventually dozed off, my exhaustion overwhelming my fear. But at precisely 3 a.m., I was jolted awake. The room was silent. but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as though I was being watched. I turned my head toward the door, my heart pounding, and there it was again, the shadow, darker and more defined than ever before, pressed against the slim crack of my door, left slightly open. It seemed eager, almost as if it was trying to get in. I couldn't take my eyes off it, watching with a morbid fascination as it began to move slowly, gliding down the hall, only to pause at Mr. Will's door. The shadow lingered there for a long moment, and then, to my horror, it passed through his closed door, disappearing into his room. I lay there, too terrified to move, listening for any sign of what was happening across the hall, but there was nothing, just an oppressive silence that felt like it was suffocating me. I barely slept the rest of the night, my mind racing with fear and questions. In the morning, I learned that Mr. Will had passed away during the night. The nurses said he'd gone peacefully, that it was simply his time, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow had something to do with it. I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Later that day, I overheard two nurses talking in hushed tones outside my room. "It's always around 3 in the morning," one of them whispered, "and it's always the patients at the end of the hall. I don't know what it is, but it's not natural." Hearing that sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just a trick of the light or the side effects of medication. There was something in the hospital, something that only came out in the dead of night, and I was next in line. That night, I lay awake, my body tense with fear. I knew it would come for me, just as it had come for Mr. Will. I watched the clock, my heart pounding harder, as the minutes ticked closer to 3 a.m. I wanted to leave, to run out of that room and never look back, but I was too afraid to move. When the clock struck 3 a.m., the shadow appeared again, darker and more defined than ever. It slid across the hallway floor, creeping toward my door, and I knew there was no escaping it. I held my breath, watching as the shadow pressed against the thin opening of my door, almost as though it was testing the barrier, trying to find a way in. I could feel its presence cold, filling the room with a sense of dread so strong it was suffocating. For what felt like hours, the shadow lingered outside my door, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The next morning, I was discharged from the hospital. I left as quickly as I could, grateful to be free of that place. But even now, I can't shake the memory of that shadow lurking in the hallway, waiting. And sometimes, I wonder if it's still there, waiting for its next victim.